The ship shuddered violently as another impact rocked the hull, throwing me against the metal wall hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Red emergency lights spun across the corridor, and somewhere below decks, a hull breach alarm screamed a warning that made my blood run cold. "Hostile drones have breached outer defenses," a voice shouted over the comm system. "All hands to combat stations, this is not a drill. My name is Daniel Marsh, and I am a defense systems engineer aboard Kestrel Station, an outpost built along a disputed border where humanity and the Thalran, an ancient alien species with silver eyes and near-perfect discipline, work together to hold off raiders who prey on unprotected colonies. That night, the raiders came in numbers we had never seen before, and within minutes, half our outer shields had already failed. I ran through the shaking corridor, dodging a shower of sparks from a ruptured conduit, my heart slamming against my ribs. Every second mattered now. If the reactor shielding failed completely, the entire station would lose power exactly when we needed it most, leaving us defenseless against whatever was tearing through our outer hull. I reached the defense control room just as another explosion rattled the deck beneath my feet, and there she was, standing at the center console, her hands moving faster across the controls than I had ever seen anyone move in my life. Illyra San was the lead tactical officer from the Thalran delegation stationed with us, and if you asked anyone aboard Kestrel Station to describe her, they would tell you she was ice-given form, brilliant beyond measure, but distant in a way that made her almost impossible to read. The Thalran considered comm control the highest form of honor among their people. Losing composure, especially during crisis, was seen as a serious failure. Illyra had never once, in the 8 months I had known her, shown a single crack in that composure. "3 drone squads incoming," she said, her voice flat despite the chaos exploding around her. "I need someone to manually override the secondary shield relay before the next wave arrives. We have less than 90 seconds. I did not hesitate. I dropped to my knees beside the exposed panel, my hands shaking as I worked through the tangled wiring, sparks biting at my fingers as I forced the relay back online. Behind me, Illyra kept firing commands to the automated defense turrets, her fingers dancing across holographic controls with a precision that felt almost inhuman. "Relay restored," I shouted over the noise. "Copy," she replied instantly. "Redirecting power to forward turrets now." For the next several minutes, which felt endless, we worked together without wasted words, just sharp commands and quick confirmations. Explosions rocked the station again and again, but slowly, gradually, the incoming drone numbers on the main display began to fall. The shaking eased, the alarms softened. Finally, an eerie, exhausted silence settled over the control room as the last hostile signal blinked out of existence. I collapsed against the wall, breathing hard, sweat soaking through my uniform. Illyra remained standing at the console, her spine perfectly straight, studying the readouts one final time, as if the last 10 minutes of chaos had barely touched her. "Hostiles neutralized," she said. "We held the station with 62 seconds to spare." 62 seconds. That number hung heavy in the smoke-filled air. I looked at her, this small, unshakable woman who had just guided us through a battle that should have overwhelmed us completely, without ever raising her voice or losing her focus for even a moment, and something honest slipped out of my mouth before I could stop myself. "That was sweet," I said, shaking my head in disbelief, meaning nothing more than pure admiration for what she had just done under fire. The room went silent in a way that had nothing to do with the battle ending. I noticed it first in the 2 Thalran technicians near the far wall. Both of them turned toward me at the exact same instant, their expressions unreadable but their attention suddenly razor-sharp, as though I had spoken something with far more weight than I understood. Then I looked at Illyra. She had gone completely still. Not the calm stillness of someone in control, but a different kind of stillness entirely, like a machine that had just received an input it was never designed to process. Her silver eyes were locked onto mine, wide in a way I had never once seen from her. For a long moment, Illyra San, the most composed person I had ever met, looked like she had forgotten how to breathe. "What did you say?" she asked quietly. "I said that was sweet," I repeated, confused by the sudden tension filling the room. "The way you handled that. It was incredible under that kind of pressure." She did not respond right away. Instead, she turned back to the console, her fingers hovering above the controls without actually touching anything, as though she needed a moment to remember what her hands were supposed to do. One of the Thalran technicians quietly slipped out through the side door, walking faster than seemed necessary for someone who had just survived a drone assault. "Understood," Illyra finally said, her voice tighter than before. "I will file the combat report." You should have your hands examined for burns before returning to quarters. That was it. No explanation, no acknowledgement of the strange charge still hanging in the air between us. She gathered her datapad and walked out through the far doorway without looking back at me even once. I stayed there a long moment, staring at the space where she had been standing, trying to understand what had just happened. I had given a compliment, that was all. Back on Earth, that word would barely register as anything worth noticing. Here, floating on the edge of hostile space beside a species I still did not fully understand, it had apparently landed like an unexpected detonation. I found Owen Hale in the mess hall an hour later, still wearing his defense uniform, staring blankly at a cup of something that was supposed to be tea but never quite tasted right up here. Owen had served alongside the Thalran delegation far longer than I had, and if any human aboard this station understood their customs, it was him. "You look like you have seen a ghost," Owen said, glancing up as I dropped into the seat across from him. "I think I did something wrong," I said. "Something involving Alira." His eyebrows lifted immediately. "What happened?" I told him everything. The drone attack, the relay repair, the way she had guided us through impossible odds almost single-handedly, and then the one word I had said afterward without thinking. Sweet. As soon as I repeated it out loud, Owen's face changed completely. His cup froze halfway to his mouth. "You said what?" he asked, setting the cup down slowly. "Sweet," I repeated, a nervous knot forming tighter in my chest. "I meant it as admiration, that is all." "Why, is that a problem?" Owen rubbed both hands over his face, letting out a long, heavy breath. "Daniel, listen to me very carefully, because I do not think you understand what you just did." He leaned forward, lowering his voice even though the mess hall was nearly empty at this hour. "In basic Thalaran there are dozens of words for admiration, for respect, for being impressed by skill under pressure. They use those words constantly, in reports, in briefings, even casually between colleagues. But there is one word, just one, completely separate from all of those. It is not used lightly. It is not spoken casually. It is used exactly once in a Thalran person's entire life, only after a very specific, very formal bonding process that can take years to complete. My stomach dropped slightly. "Okay, and that word is?" "Sweet," Owen said. "Translated into English, that is the closest word we have. But in their language, it does not mean impressive or skilled. It means something closer to, this is the person I choose above all others, permanently. It is not a compliment, Daniel. It is essentially a declaration." For a moment I could not speak. The mess hall lights suddenly felt too bright, the recycled air too thin. I thought back to the way the room had gone quiet, the way the technician had left so quickly, the way Alira had frozen before walking out without a word of explanation. "That cannot be right," I said, shaking my head. "I did not mean anything like that. I did not even know that word carried any special meaning. I was just speaking honestly after something intense happened." "I know that," Owen said gently. "But she does not know that, not yet. To her, and to every Thalaran who heard you say it, you just did something enormously significant, whether you intended it or not." I put my head in my hands, trying to process everything at once. Months of careful cooperation between our two species, built through shared danger and slow trust, and I might have just shattered some invisible boundary without even realizing it existed, all because I opened my mouth after a battle and said the first honest thing that came to mind. "What happens now?" I asked. "Do I need to apologize? Explain it was simply the adrenaline talking?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his cooling cup. When he finally answered, his voice carried a strange weight I had not expected. "That is usually what happens, yes. Humans have made small language mistakes before, and the Thalran have generally been understanding, provided we correct ourselves quickly." He paused. "But Daniel, from what you are describing, this was not a small mistake. Everyone in that control room heard it. Everyone will know by morning, if they do not already. And the way Alira reacted, that was not the reaction of someone confused by unfamiliar alien words. That was something else entirely." I looked up at him. "What do you mean, something else?" Owen met my eyes carefully. "I mean, in over a year of working beside the Thalran delegation, I have never once seen one of them freeze like that. Not during combat, not during disputes, not during anything. They do not lose composure, ever. Something about what you said reached her in a way their own careful language rarely manages." I sat back in my chair, my mind spinning with everything I had just learned. An hour ago, I had been fighting to keep a relay online during a life-threatening assault, focused entirely on survival. Now I sat in a nearly empty mess hall, staring at the wreckage of what might be a serious diplomatic crisis, caused entirely by one honest, careless word. Sweet. 4 letters. A word I had used dozens of times before without thinking twice, tossed around casually about small victories, about nothing important at all. Here, aboard this station, surrounded by a species that treated language like something sacred, that same word had apparently just changed everything between us. I did not know yet whether I had made a terrible mistake, or accidentally stumbled into something far bigger than I could understand. All I knew was that somewhere on this station, Illyra-san, the most composed person I had ever met, was walking through the halls carrying the weight of a single word I never meant the way she heard it, and somehow, deep down, underneath the panic and confusion, a small part of me was not entirely sure I wanted to take it back. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my bunk staring at the scorched ceiling panel above me, replaying the moment over and over, the way Illyra had frozen, the way her silver eyes had widened before she caught herself and walked away without another word. By morning I had convinced myself the smartest thing to do was find her immediately and explain everything, clear the air before it turned into something bigger than it already was. That plan fell apart the moment I stepped into the main corridor. Every Thalern I passed looked at me differently. Not with anger exactly, but with a kind of careful, measured attention, like they were studying a piece of equipment that had suddenly started behaving in an unpredictable way. A few of them stopped walking when they saw me, watching until I passed before continuing on. None of them said anything. None of them needed to. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me from every direction of that narrow corridor. Owen found me near the damaged outer hull 2 hours later, inspecting the scorch marks left by the drone assault, and one look at his face told me the situation had not improved overnight. "It is worse than we thought," he said quietly, pulling me aside near an empty maintenance bay. "The story has spread through the entire delegation. Some of them are treating it as a strange curiosity, human ignorance of our customs, nothing serious. But others, especially the senior officers, are treating it very differently." "Differently how?" I asked, my chest tightening. "They are treating it as an actual declaration," Owen said. "Whether you meant it or not does not matter to them. Words carry permanent weight in Thalern culture, regardless of intent." For 2 days I did not see Illyra at all. She stopped attending shared tactical briefings, sending written reports through the station's internal system instead. I told myself she was simply busy, handling repairs from the attack, filing damage assessments across 3 decks. But deep down I knew the truth. She was avoiding me. I threw myself into hull repairs during those 2 days, staying busy so I would not have time to dwell on the strange tightness in my chest every time I passed near her quarters. I told myself it was guilt over the trouble I had caused. I told myself a lot of things that felt increasingly less true the longer those 2 days stretched on. On the 3rd morning, a message appeared on my personal console, short and formal, containing only a time and a location. Illyra wanted to meet me in the small tactical room near the command deck, alone. I arrived early, my nerves buzzing beneath my skin as I sat at the narrow metal table, staring at the closed door, waiting. When it finally slid open, Illyra stepped inside, and I immediately noticed how different she looked from the composed officer I had grown used to seeing. Her posture was still straight, still controlled, but there was something tighter in the way she held herself, something guarded that had not been there before the attack. She sat across from me without a greeting, folding her hands neatly on the table. "I have requested this meeting to clarify what occurred in the defense control room 3 days ago," she said, her voice carefully measured, each word placed with obvious precision. "I need you to state clearly, for the record, what your intention was when you spoke the word in question." I understood immediately why she framed it this way. This was her offering me an exit, a formal opportunity to say it had all been a mistake, nothing more. All I had to do was agree, and the entire situation could quietly disappear. "I did not know what the word meant," I said honestly. "On Earth it is used casually, all the time. I said it because I was genuinely impressed by what you did under fire. That is the truth." Something flickered across her face, quick and impossible to name. "I understand," she said. "Then we can consider the matter a linguistic misunderstanding, and I will inform the delegation accordingly." She began gathering her datapad, preparing to end the meeting exactly as I had told myself I wanted. This was the easy path, the safe path, the one that avoided every complicated feeling I had been wrestling with for 3 sleepless nights. But I did not move to leave. "Wait," I said, the word slipping out before I fully decided to say it. Illyra paused, her hand still resting on the datapad, her eyes lifting slowly to meet mine. "Is there something else?" I sat there for a long moment, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. I could still choose the easy path, Instead, I found myself speaking slowly, carefully, choosing each word the way she always did. I did not know what that word meant when I said it, I told her. That part is true, but now that I understand what it means to your people, I am not sure I want to take it back. The room went completely silent. Alira's hand slipped off the datapad. For a long moment, she simply stared at me, and I watched something break through the careful composure she had built for as long as I had known her. Her lips parted slightly, as if she meant to speak but had forgotten how. And then, slowly, unmistakably, color rose across her pale skin, a warm flush spreading from her neck toward her cheeks, something I had never once seen on a Thalaran face. That should not be possible, she said quietly, her voice unsteady, stripped of the formal precision she always carried. This reaction is reserved for our own kind, triggered only through ritual acknowledgement. I leaned forward slightly, unable to look away. Maybe it is not about species, I said quietly. Maybe it is just about meaning it. Her breath caught audibly. Say it again, she whispered, gripping the edge of the table as though she needed something solid to hold on to. Before I could answer her, the entire room shook violently, throwing both of us sideways as a deep, grinding alarm tore through the station. Red light replaced the soft glow overhead, and Alira's expression shifted instantly from raw vulnerability to sharp, trained alertness. Proximity alarm, she said, already rising from her seat. That is not a random malfunction. We ran together toward the command deck, the corridor lights flickering with every fresh tremor beneath our feet. On the main display, a cluster of unknown signals had appeared at the very edge of the station's sensor range, moving with a coordinated precision that told us immediately this was no accident and no small threat. Confirm contact, the duty officer shouted from the command console. Multiple hostile vessels, larger than the previous drone wave, estimated arrival, 11 minutes. Alira's face hardened into pure focus, every trace of the vulnerable woman from the tactical room vanishing behind the trained officer who had just guided us through one battle already. She turned to me, her voice sharp and urgent. Whatever this becomes between us, it will have to wait, she said. Right now, I need every engineer this station has, and I need you at the forward defense grid within 5 minutes. I nodded, adrenaline replacing the confusion still swirling in my chest. As I turned to run toward the defense grid, I caught one last look at her, standing tall at the command console once again, silver eyes locked on the incoming threat. And I realized with sudden clarity that whatever fragile thing had just begun to grow between us was about to be tested by something far more dangerous than words. I sprinted through the shaking corridors toward the forward defense grid, my boots pounding against metal decking as the station's warning system screamed overhead. 11 minutes. That was all the time we had before a fleet larger than anything we had faced in months arrived at our doorstep, and half our shields were still recovering from the last assault. I reached the defense grid to find Owen already there, sweat soaking through his uniform as he worked frantically to bring the secondary turret array back online. Power distribution is unstable, he shouted over the noise. We lost 2 full grid sections in the last attack, and they never finished repairs. Then we finish them now, I said, dropping beside him, my hands already moving through the tangled wiring. Across the station, Alira's voice cut through the comm system, calm despite the chaos, directing every available crew member with the same precision she had shown during the drone assault. All non-essential personnel to shelter decks. Combat crews, hold your positions. We will not lose this station. Minutes stretched painfully as we worked, sparks biting at my fingers, sweat stinging my eyes. The unknown fleet grew closer on the main display with every passing second, their formation tight and coordinated, nothing like the scattered drone swarm from before. This was a trained force, moving with deliberate purpose, and something about that precision sent a cold, sharp fear through my chest that had nothing to do with the explosions still echoing through the station. Grid Section 3 restored, Owen shouted, wiping sweat from his brow. That gives us maybe 60% shield capacity. It will have to be enough, I said, moving to the next damaged section. The first enemy vessels appeared on the horizon exactly as Alira had predicted, dark shapes cutting through the void toward us with terrifying speed. The station's defense turrets opened fire immediately, streaks of light lancing out into the darkness, and for a moment it seemed like our restored shields might actually hold against the incoming assault. Then the first enemy vessel broke formation, diving directly toward the section of hull where Owen and I were still working. Incoming, Alira's voice snapped over the comm, sharper than I had ever heard it. Direct impact, forward defense grid, 7 seconds. I grabbed Owen by the arm, hauling him away from the exposed panel just as the entire wall exploded inward. throwing us both across the corridor in a wave of heat and debris. My ears rang violently, my vision swimming as smoke poured through the breach, and for a long, terrifying moment, I could not tell if Owen was still breathing beside me. "Owen," I shouted, shaking him roughly. "Owen, talk to me." He groaned, blinking through the smoke, blood trickling from a cut above his eyebrow. "I am alive," he managed. "Barely." I hauled him to his feet, both of us stumbling away from the breach as emergency bulkheads slammed shut behind us, sealing off the damaged section before the entire station lost atmosphere. Through the small viewport nearby, I caught sight of the battle raging outside, our defense turrets tearing through enemy formations while Elira's voice continued issuing rapid, precise commands that somehow kept the entire station from falling apart. We made it to the medical bay just as another explosion rocked the station, and I watched Owen get pulled onto a stretcher by two exhausted medics, his injuries serious but not life-threatening. Relief flooded through me for only a moment before the comm system crackled again, this time carrying a message that made my blood run cold. "Command deck has taken direct damage," the duty officer's voice announced, strained and urgent. "Tactical officer down. Repeat, tactical officer is down." My heart stopped completely. I did not think. I ran. I sprinted through corridors filled with smoke and debris, pushing past crew members rushing in the opposite direction, my mind fixed entirely on one single thought, reaching the command deck before it was too late. When I finally burst through the damaged doorway, the sight that greeted me nearly knocked the breath from my lungs completely. The command deck was a wreck of sparking consoles and shattered panels, and near the center of it all, Elira lay slumped against an overturned console, a deep gash along her temple, her silver eyes half closed and unfocused. Two crew members were already working frantically around her, but the fear on their faces told me everything I needed to know before they spoke a single word. "Elira," I said, dropping to my knees beside her, my hands hovering uselessly over the wound on her head, terrified of making things worse. Her eyes fluttered, struggling to focus on my face. "The fleet," she whispered weakly. "Have they broken through?" "Do not worry about the fleet right now," I said, my voice shaking despite every effort to keep it steady. "Just stay with me." "Daniel," she said, her voice growing fainter. "The secondary command override. It is still locked. Without it, the automated defenses will fail within minutes." I looked at the medics, and one of them shook her head grimly. "She needs to reach medical immediately, but the override requires her authorization code. Without it, we lose the entire defense grid." Elira's hand weakly gripped my sleeve, pulling my attention back to her. "The code," she whispered, forcing the words out through obvious pain. "I need to input it myself. There is no time to transfer authorization." Against every protest from the medics, against every instinct telling me to get her to safety immediately, I helped her rise unsteadily to her feet, supporting most of her weight as we stumbled together toward the damaged console. Outside the viewport, another wave of enemy vessels closed in on the station, and I understood with terrifying clarity that we had only moments left before everything fell apart completely. "Just a little further," I said, practically carrying her the final steps. Elira's fingers, trembling but determined, moved across the console with the last reserves of her strength, entering the override sequence with painstaking precision, despite the blood running down the side of her face. The moment she finished, the entire defense grid surged back to life, turrets locking onto incoming targets with renewed accuracy, our remaining shields stabilizing just enough to hold against the next assault wave. The instant the sequence completed, Elira's legs gave out completely, and I caught her before she could collapse to the deck, holding her tightly against me as the medics finally rushed forward to take over. "You did it," I whispered against her hair, relief and fear tangled together so tightly I could barely breathe. "The station is still standing because of you." Her eyes fluttered open one final time before the medics pulled her gently from my arms, her voice barely audible over the chaos still raging outside the station. "Say it again," she whispered, so faint I almost missed it entirely. "Before everything else." I held her hand as the medics began moving her toward the stretcher, my heart pounding with a desperate need to make sure she heard me clearly before the darkness took her under. "You are sweet, Elira," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "More than sweet. Please, just hold on." Her eyes closed, a faint, exhausted smile touching her lips just before the medics carried her away, and I stood there in the wreckage of the command deck, watching the battle rage on outside the viewport, praying desperately that I had not said those words for the very last time. The battle raged on for nearly 2 more hours after Elira was carried away from the command deck, and I spent every one of those minutes fighting alongside the rest of the crew, rerouting power, patching hull breaches, doing anything I could to keep my mind from spiraling into panic about the woman fighting for her life in the medical bay below. By the time the last enemy vessel finally retreated into the darkness beyond our sensor range, Kestrel Station looked like a wreck barely holding itself together, but it was still standing. Smoke still drifted through several corridors. Emergency crews still worked to seal breaches across 3 decks. But we had survived, and that fact alone felt like a miracle after everything that had happened. I found my way to the medical bay the moment I could break away from repair duties, my uniform torn and scorched, my hands raw from hours of frantic work. The room was crowded with injured crew members, some human, some Thauran, all of them being tended to by exhausted medics moving between beds as quickly as they could manage. I found Elira near the back of the room, her head wrapped carefully in a medical bandage, her silver eyes closed, her chest rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm that told me she was finally resting rather than fighting for her life. Owen sat in a chair beside her bed, his own injuries bandaged, watching over her with quiet concern. "She stabilized about an hour ago," he said quietly as I approached. "The medics say she will recover fully, but she needs rest. A lot of it." Relief hit me so hard my legs nearly gave out beneath me. I sank into the empty chair on the other side of her bed, unable to look away from her face, still pale but no longer carrying the terrifying stillness it had held when I found her collapsed on the command deck. "She saved this entire station," I said quietly. "Twice, in less than a week." Owen nodded slowly. "Word is already spreading through the delegation. What she did, entering that override sequence while injured, refusing to let anyone else attempt it, that kind of action does not go unnoticed among the Thalsran." I sat with Elira for hours, watching her sleep, my mind replaying every moment since the drone assault first began, the reactor crisis that started everything, the flush across her skin in the tactical room, the desperate whisper on the command deck asking me to say it again before the darkness took her under. Somewhere along the way, admiration had become something far deeper, something I no longer had any interest in denying to myself or anyone else. She finally woke as the artificial night cycle dimmed the station's lights, her eyes fluttering open slowly, confusion clearing as she focused on my face beside her bed. "Daniel," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "How long have I been unconscious?" "Almost 9 hours," I said, unable to hide the relief flooding through my voice. "You saved the entire station, Elira. The defense grid held because of you." She tried to sit up, wincing slightly at the effort, and I gently helped her settle back against the raised bed instead. "The fleet," she asked, "did they retreat completely?" "Completely," I confirmed. "We took heavy damage, but we held. Everyone is alive because you refused to let anyone else touch that override sequence." She was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "I remember asking you something," she said slowly, "before the medics pulled me away. I do not remember if you answered." My throat tightened at the memory. "I answered," I said quietly. "I told you that you are sweet." "More than sweet. I meant every word of it, even with everything falling apart around us." Her eyes glistened faintly, and this time she did not try to hide the emotion crossing her face, the careful walls she had spent her entire life building finally allowing something real to show through completely. "I heard you," she admitted softly. "Even through the pain, even as consciousness slipped away, I heard you clearly. It was the last thing I remember before the darkness took me, and somehow, knowing that, I was not afraid of what might come next." I reached for her hand carefully, mindful of the bandages still wrapped around her, and she laced her fingers through mine without hesitation, a small but powerful gesture that told me everything I needed to know about where we stood now. 3 days later, once Elira had regained enough strength to leave the medical bay, Elder Kalen Dross summoned both of us to the delegation chamber, his expression carrying none of the formal detachment I remembered from earlier encounters with senior Thalran officers. "The Council has been closely monitoring events aboard this station," he said once we stood before him in the curved chamber. "Not only the diplomatic matters surrounding the words spoken between you, but the events of the recent battle as well." Elira straightened beside me, her composure returning despite the lingering exhaustion still visible in her posture. "Elder Dross, I stand ready to answer any questions the Council may have." "There is little left to question," Dross said, surprising both of us. "Reports from multiple crew members, both human and Thalran, confirm that you risked your own recovery to secure this station's defenses during the height of the assault. Several among the Council, who previously doubted the legitimacy of what occurred between you, now view your actions differently." I glanced at Elira, watching hope flicker cautiously across her tired features. Crisis reveals truth more clearly than careful ritual ever could, Dross continued. You did not calculate your actions on that command deck. You acted from instinct, from genuine conviction, the very same quality that led to the declaration spoken between you days earlier. The Council has taken note of this consistency. What does that mean for the observation period? Illyra asked carefully. It means the Council is prepared to consider your bond with far greater confidence than before, Dross said. The formal observation period remains in place, as tradition requires, but I suspect you will find far less resistance moving forward than you encountered during your first hearing. Relief washed over both of us in that curved chamber, though Dross was not yet finished speaking. There is one more matter, he said, his tone shifting slightly. Sensor arrays detected fragments of technology among the retreating enemy fleet that do not match any raider faction previously recorded in this sector. Command believes this attack was not random. Someone directed that fleet toward this station specifically, and we do not yet know why, or whether they intend to return. The warmth of relief I had felt only moments earlier cooled sharply into renewed unease. Whatever fragile peace we had just secured, both personally and diplomatically, suddenly felt far less certain than it had a moment before. Elder Dross's warning proved accurate faster than any of us expected. 6 days after the delegation chamber meeting, long-range sensors picked up the same unidentified technology signature approaching Kestrel Station once again, this time in numbers that dwarfed the previous assault entirely. Command estimated a full fleet, organized and purposeful, closing in with clear intention to finish what the first attack had failed to accomplish. I stood beside Illyra on the reinforced command deck as the reports came in, her injuries from the previous battle mostly healed, though I still noticed the faint scar along her temple whenever the emergency lighting caught it at certain angles. Her composure had returned fully, sharp and focused, but something had changed in the way she carried herself. A quiet steadiness that had not been there before the battle nearly took her life. Estimated arrival, 18 minutes, the duty officer announced grimly. This fleet is nearly triple the size of the previous assault. Illyra turned to the assembled crew, her voice carrying clearly across the reinforced command deck. We held this station once already against impossible odds. We will hold it again. Owen appeared at my side, fully recovered from his own injuries, determination replacing the fear I remembered from the last assault. Defense grid is at full capacity this time, he said. Whatever they are planning, we are not caught off guard again. The next 18 minutes passed in a blur of frantic preparation. Every system checked and rechecked, every crew member positioned exactly where they needed to be. When the enemy fleet finally emerged from the darkness beyond our sensor range, their formation revealed something none of us had expected. A massive command vessel positioned at the center of their attack, clearly directing the entire assault with coordinated precision. That is their leadership ship, Illyra said, studying the tactical display with narrowed eyes. If we disable that vessel, the rest of their fleet will lose cohesion. That ship is heavily shielded, the duty officer warned. Our current firepower cannot punch through those defenses fast enough before their fleet overwhelms our outer grid. Illyra's eyes moved rapidly across the tactical data, and I watched her mind work through the problem with the same brilliant speed I had witnessed during the reactor crisis months earlier. Combine turret arrays 4 through 9 into a single focus strike, she said suddenly. If we concentrate every available shot into one coordinated burst, we can breach their shielding before their fleet closes the distance. That will leave the rest of the station critically exposed, the duty officer said, worry evident in his voice. For 30 seconds, Illyra replied firmly. Long enough to end this before it truly begins. The plan moved into motion immediately, every available crew member, working together, with a coordination that felt entirely different from the panic of our first encounter with this new enemy. I found myself stationed at the power distribution controls, feeding every available watt toward the combined turret array as the enemy fleet closed the remaining distance. Firing solution locked, Illyra announced, her voice steady despite the mounting tension across the command deck. On my mark. The enemy fleet grew larger on the main display with terrifying speed, their formation tightening as they prepared their own assault. My hands hovered over the controls, waiting, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it over the tense silence gripping the entire deck. Mark, Illyra called out. Every turret across Kestrel Station fired simultaneously, a single devastating burst of concentrated fire streaking across the darkness toward the enemy command vessel. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened, and I feared the plan had failed completely. Then the enemy command vessel erupted in a brilliant flash of light, its shields collapsing entirely under the concentrated assault, secondary explosions rippling through its hull in rapid succession. Exactly as Elira predicted, the surrounding fleet immediately lost cohesion, ships scattering in confused directions as their coordinated leadership vanished from the battlefield entirely. "Their formation is breaking," the duty officer shouted, disbelief evident in his voice. "They are retreating." Cheers erupted across the command deck as the remaining enemy vessels turned away from the station, fleeing back into the darkness they had emerged from only minutes earlier. I watched the tactical display until every hostile signal disappeared completely, relief flooding through me so powerfully that my legs nearly buckled beneath me. Elira turned away from the console, and for the first time since I had known her, she allowed herself to simply stand there for a moment, breathing steadily, letting the tension of the last 18 minutes finally drain from her shoulders. "We held," she said quietly, almost disbelieving. "You held," I corrected gently, stepping closer to her. "Your plan saved this entire station, Elira. Again." She looked at me then, exhaustion and relief, and something warmer mixing together across her features, and this time, in front of the entire command crew, she did not hesitate at all before closing the remaining distance between us. "Elder Dross was right," she said softly. "Crisis reveals truth far more clearly than careful ritual ever could. I do not need 6 months of observation to know what I already understand completely." 3 weeks later, the delegation chamber convened one final time, and this time, when Elder Dross addressed the gathered council, his voice carried an unmistakable warmth that had never been present during our earlier hearings. "Given the events of these past weeks," he announced, "the council has voted to formally recognize the bond between Elira San and Daniel Marsh, effective immediately, without further observation period required." Elira's hand found mine instantly, her fingers lacing through my own with the same steady confidence she carried into every crisis this station had faced. Around us, the gathered elders offered quiet nods of acknowledgement, a silent acceptance that would have seemed impossible only weeks earlier. Standing there in that curved chamber, having survived 2 devastating battles and an entire delegation's careful scrutiny, I realized that everything had truly begun with one honest, careless word spoken in the chaos of a reactor crisis. A word I never planned to say, but one I would happily say again, every single day, for as long as Elira would let me. "Say it again," she whispered beside me, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips as the council session came to a close. I smiled back at her, holding her hand tightly as we walked together out of that chamber and into whatever challenges waited for us next. "You are sweet, Elira," I said quietly. "You always will be." 6 weeks after the council formally recognized our bond, Kestrel Station held its first ever joining ceremony between a human and a Thalaran, and the entire station, human and alien crew alike, gathered in the largest hangar bay to witness it. I stood near the center of that vast open space, the massive doors sealed shut against the void outside, strings of soft light hanging overhead where damaged panels had been repaired weeks earlier. It was strange to think that this same hangar had once been scorched black from the Second Fleet assault, and now it held rows of crew members dressed in their finest uniforms, waiting quietly for the ceremony to begin. Owen stood beside me, adjusting the collar of my uniform for the 3rd time in 5 minutes, clearly more nervous than I was. "You look fine," he said, though his hands kept fidgeting regardless. "Better than fine. Try not to trip over anything important." "Thank you for the confidence," I said, managing a laugh despite the nervous energy building in my chest. Elder Kalen Dross stood at the front of the gathered crowd, dressed in formal Thalaran robes I had never seen him wear before, deep blue fabric marked with silver thread that caught the light every time he moved. Beside him waited 2 other senior delegation members, their expressions solemn but no longer carrying the suspicion I remembered from our very first hearing months earlier. Then the far doors slid open, and Elira stepped into the hangar. She wore Thalaran's ceremonial attire, pale fabric that seemed to shimmer faintly under the hangar lights, her dark hair pulled back to reveal the small scar along her temple that she had chosen not to hide. She walked forward slowly, her silver eyes locked on mine the entire distance, and I forgot completely about the nervous energy that had been building inside me only moments before. When she finally reached my side, Elder Dross raised his hands, and the murmuring crowd fell into respectful silence. "We gather today to witness something unprecedented," Dross began, his voice carrying clearly across the hangar. "A bond formed not through careful ritual or years of measured courtship, but through honesty, spoken in crisis, and proven again through courage under fire. Some among our people once questioned whether such a bond could hold true meaning. I no longer count myself among those who doubt." He turned toward Elira first, his expression softening slightly. "Elira San, Do you affirm this bond, freely and completely, understanding all that it requires of you? I do, she said, her voice steady and clear, without hesitation, and without regret. Dross turned to me next. Daniel Marsh, do you affirm this bond, freely and completely, understanding all that it requires of you? I do, I said, meaning it more completely than I had ever meant anything in my life. Then by the authority granted to this delegation, Dross said, and by the witness of this entire station, I recognize this bond as complete. The hangar erupted into applause, human cheers mixing with the quieter but no less genuine approval of the Thalsaran crew members scattered throughout the crowd. Illyra's hand found mine immediately, her fingers lacing through my own exactly the way they had during every crisis we had faced together, steady and certain despite everything that could have torn us apart along the way. I leaned close to her, my voice barely above a whisper beneath the noise of the celebration surrounding us. Say it again, I murmured, echoing the words she had once asked of me. Illyra's smile widened, warm and unguarded in a way that still felt like a small miracle every single time I witnessed it. You are sweet, Daniel, she said softly. You always will be. The celebration continued long into the artificial night cycle, crew members sharing food and drink across long tables set up throughout the hangar. Stories of the two battles that had nearly destroyed the station now told with laughter instead of fear. Owen found me near one of the tables sometime later, 2 drinks in hand, offering one to me with a satisfied grin. Never thought I would see the day, he said, shaking his head. A human and a Thalfran, bonded and celebrated by an entire delegation. Half the crew still cannot quite believe it happened. Neither can I, honestly, I admitted, taking the drink from him gratefully. Feels like a lifetime ago that I said one careless word after a reactor emergency and nearly caused a diplomatic disaster. That careless word saved this station twice, Owen said. Illyra fights differently now, you know. Sharper somehow, like she finally has something worth fighting even harder to protect. I glanced across the hangar to where Illyra stood speaking with a group of younger Thalran crew members, her posture relaxed in a way I had never seen before the joining ceremony, her laughter carrying faintly across the noise of the celebration. Something about watching her like that, open and unguarded among her own people, filled my chest with a warmth I never expected to feel this far from Earth. The celebration was still in full swing when the station's alert system chimed softly, not the harsh emergency alarm I had grown to dread, but a quieter tone reserved for routine notifications. A moment later, the duty officer's voice crackled gently over the hangar speakers. Apologies for the interruption, she said, an unmistakable smile evident in her tone despite the formal announcement. Long-range sensors have confirmed the retreating enemy fleet has withdrawn entirely from this sector, with no further hostile activity detected across 3 full survey sweeps. Kestrel Station's border is officially secure. The hangar erupted into another round of cheers, relief and celebration mixing together as the weight of months of uncertainty finally lifted from the entire crew. Illyra made her way back through the crowd toward me, her expression bright with the same relief I felt echoing through my own chest. Secure, she repeated softly, almost disbelieving. For the first time since I arrived at this station, I do not feel like I am waiting for the next attack. Maybe that means we finally get some peace, I said, wrapping my arm gently around her shoulders. Peace, she said thoughtfully, leaning into me with a comfort that would have seemed impossible from the composed, distant officer I had first met all those months ago. I am not entirely certain I know what that feels like yet, but I am willing to learn, especially with you beside me. Later that night, once the celebration had finally quieted and most of the crew had retired to their quarters, Illyra and I stood together near the same observation deck where she had first defended our bond in front of the delegation. The gas giant churned slowly below the station, its storms lit faintly by distant starlight, exactly as they had been on that first uncertain night months earlier. Do you ever think about it? I asked quietly, watching the swirling clouds beneath us. That first day, if I had never said anything at all. Illyra considered the question carefully, her silver eyes reflecting the faint light from the storms below. Often, she admitted. I have wondered many times what might have happened if you had simply stayed silent, if I had never heard that word at all. And what do you think would have happened? I asked. She turned to face me fully, her expression thoughtful and open in a way that still felt like a quiet miracle every time I witnessed it. I believe I would have continued exactly as I always had, disciplined, composed, and entirely alone, convinced that such control was the only path worth choosing. I do not think I ever would have discovered otherwise, not without someone reckless enough and honest enough to say something I never expected to hear. I reached for her hand, holding it gently as the storms churned silently beneath us, the station finally quiet and secure after everything we had survived together. I am glad I said it, I told her softly, even though I had no idea what it meant at the time. Illyra smiled, the same rare, genuine smile that had first broken through her careful composure all those months ago, in a smoke-filled control room, and this time, she did not hesitate at all, before leaning into me completely, letting herself simply feel safe for the first time in longer than she could remember. "So am I," she whispered. "Say it again." I smiled back at her, holding her close as the storms continued their slow, endless churn far beneath us. And for the first time since that reactor crisis had thrown our two lives together so unexpectedly, neither of us needed to brace for whatever crisis might come next. For now, standing together in the quiet aftermath of everything we had survived, there was only this moment, steady and certain, exactly the way it was always meant to be. "You are sweet, Illyra," I said, meaning it completely, now and always, and I will keep saying it, for as long as you want to hear it.